Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. This article comes to you guys from GeekWire. I'll leave a link to it in the description so you guys could check it out. So I'm going to be straightforward, right? Most of you now that follow the channel that have seen the videos, you guys are now aware that T-Mobile is close to nearing a deal to acquire part of US Cellular. And I'm going to be very straightforward here. T-Mobile is now, by many, going to be considered the bad guy. They're going to be considered now the carrier that's buying up all the players. We're going to start hearing that all over the place. And a lot of people are going to start referencing the Sprint merger, that shouldn't have never happened and we wouldn't have never seen this type of consolidation. And I say this, right? T-Mobile wanted to be more competitive. And they were just playing, right, a fair competitive game. They ended up buying Metro PCS very early on in the John days when he became CEO. They bought some other smaller players like iWireless. They got more spectrum as well, right? We got to take that into consideration. As a standalone, T-Mobile got more spectrum. They got 600, they got 700, they got AWS 1 and 3 while they were standalone. They got AWS 1 from the failed AT&T merger, and they bought parts of AWS 3 on their own. So they made some purchases on their own as a standalone, but T-Mobile wasn't able to compete as aggressively as a standalone because they didn't have the financial backing. They knew immediately that their margins were not up to par with Verizon, AT&T, and they knew they had to play it smart, do it very strategically, and be disciplined. And that's exactly what T-Mobile did. And what happened? They ended up growing. They ended up buying who they ended up buying and the spectrum that they bought. And that allowed them to buy Sprint. With Sprint, they gained customers, they gained more towers. They now have a much better balance sheet to continue to buy players, right? If there's M&A, merger and acquisition, if there's spectrum on the table now, T-Mobile can go and buy it. Now, we got to look at it objectively, right? For those of you who are those fanboys, you will only see it one-sided. But we got to look at it objectively. Who is T-Mobile really buying? T-Mobile signaled to the street they would remain capital light. So what did they end up doing? They ended up buying a 50% stake in Lumos. Capital light, $950 million. They can afford that as this new bigger player. What did they end up doing? Not official yet, but around $2 billion will be spent on the US Cellular assets. Again, that's still relatively capital light. They're not going around buying up 50, 60, $70 billion conglomerates like AT&T did. AT&T went and bought DirecTV, then they got Time Warner, and those were like 50, 60, 70, $80 billion transactions. T-Mobile is not doing that right now. I mean, could that happen in the future? Maybe, who knows? But right now, T-Mobile is just buying up smaller players. And at that, they're not even buying them up. Really, they bought 50% part stake in Lumos, and they're buying parts of US Cellular. They're not buying the entire company of US Cellular. They're just buying a part of it, which in return is going to make T-Mobile a stronger, formidable, competitive player in rural America, because that's where this is likely headed. US Cellular doesn't really operate in major metros. And they sold the Chicago business to Sprint, so they're not in the big cities. I really think, and just to throw this in there, I think US Cellular is selling off markets where they're no longer profitable. Once everything's said and done, once all the math is crunched, in those markets that I think they're getting ready to let go to T-Mobile, the spectrum, customers, whatever, They're just no longer profitable in those markets. In the other markets where they do better, where they have higher share, they take in more revenue, more profits. Those are the markets that they will likely keep. So sitting there and saying that, hey, T-Mobile is now the bad guy. They're the problem in the industry. They're causing all this consolidation. They're making it less competitive. I just don't see it that way. And that's just looking at it objectively. Now, if you told me that T-Mobile was buying all of US Cellular, they're buying all of Lumos, they're also wanting all of Lumen, they want to buy Viero, which is another regional player. They want to buy 100% of that. Now you got my attention. Now I'm going to say, okay, somebody needs to step in. This needs to really be regulated. AT&T and Verizon need to really step in and voice their opinions on this, because now T-Mobile is just going around blindsiding everyone and just buying up all these companies. They haven't done that yet. And if we're being honest, if we compare everyone's balance sheet, T-Mobile is really not today in a position to just go out and just plaster billions of dollars all over the place. And that's really what hurt AT&T when they started going on that media venture and they started spending 60 billion, 80 billion here, and they got into debt, right? And they got high on the leverage. That's what really hurt them on wireless for years. They couldn't bid as freely and as high as they would have liked on some of the spectrum auctions, C-band, for an example. And it may have been the reason why they weren't densifying for a lot of years during LTE, because they spent so heavy on media. So when you looked at the CapEx during those years when they had all those media assets, a good chunk of that CapEx had to be spent on creating original content for HBO Max, funding DirecTV. So there was very little left for wireless, and they were still expanding fiber as well. So I think what T-Mobile is doing is fine, right? I guess the only one that could be argued and debated is the Mint Mobile, right? Why did T-Mobile really need that? It gained them no additional assets. It's more that one right there is more of, if you can't beat them, join them type situation. Mint Mobile has very cheap plans. T-Mobile's trying to be the value leader in the industry, right? So in some cases, you got to take out the value competition. And I'm willing to admit that. I'm not sitting here and trying to paint this story. I'm willing to admit that T-Mobile, it's a very high probability that they purchased Mint Mobile because of if you can't beat them, join them. And now T-Mobile takes in 100% of the revenue. It's no longer a wholesale deal. They now own the customers. So they get all of that money now. And very likely possible price increases on that in the future. I don't know if that's a year, a 2-year, a 3-year thing, but possibly could end up being a higher priced Mint Mobile in the future. So I'm willing to admit that one is that one was a little tricky for me. I understood what they were trying to do, right? They're trying to learn and be better at direct to consumer, and Mint, that business will help T-Mobile greatly with that. But other than that, I mean, they spent like 1.3 billion, which is again still capital light. So again, they didn't go out and spend a 40, 50 billion dollar check buying up a huge company, but eventually it does add up. I will say that. 950 million here, 2 billion here, 1.3 billion here. They're probably going to spend somewhere around another billion on making 2.5 more contiguous. So the more you look into it, the more you do the math, they'll be closer to 10 billion spent pretty soon. And then with this fiber venture, right, as I stated in that video, they have to gain scale. There's no way that they can just get 50% stake in Lumos, have a little operation in North Carolina and Virginia, and call it a day, because that's not cost effective. It doesn't change their business. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't really help. It doesn't really hurt. But in order for them to show proof and show an increase on the balance sheet, like where they're actually taking more revenue from that business, they're going to have to scale the fiber player, right? If T-Mobile wants to be a fiber player, known as T-Fiber, they're going to have to scale. And the only way that I feel that they can scale in at a reasonable pace, reasonable time frame, they're going to have to purchase smaller fiber players, the players. I fully anticipate them to gain at some point 100% ownership of Lumos. Lumen is possibly another one where they go small and then big in the future. Those are all possibilities, and we're speculating, but I think it's all still today capital light because T-Mobile still wants to get the high free cash flow, 16.9, 17 billion. They still want to spend aggressively on wireless, 9 to 10 billion, rounding up. And in order for them to stay there, they have to be capital light. Like I said, if their capex goes to 15 billion, their free cash flow goes way down. Why? Because they don't have the margins today to support both. Will they in the future? Quite possible. We're still waiting on the official announcement of the price increase for legacy customers. That's coming as well. So all of that is just T-Mobile trying to better the business. They're not trying to attack the market. They don't want to trigger some of the reactions that I've seen, like, oh, the merger was a failure. No, T-Mobile is now more competitive. They are a third option. They are wanting to compete and rule, and they just naturally have to grow. So by default, they were always going to be a more expensive player. There's no way that anyone could have thought that T-Mobile can operate this large network, compete and rule, expand the retail distribution, dip their hands into fiber, buy up US Cellular, and still charge the same. That's just not how business works. They can still bring value besides price. I've always stated that. Being the cheapest is not the only value that you can provide. You can provide other value. A better network is a value. A larger network is a value. A faster network is value. Netflix, Hulu, Apple TV, all that is value. You throw that all in, and you're still offering promotionally heavy discounts, right? 29, 30% if you saw the commercial recently. So they're not the cheapest anymore, but they're still cheaper than its competitors. So yes, they can claim the value still. Now the Un-carrier, that's out the window. That's why I don't mention that. They are now just like everyone else, but they know they still have to compete, and they know what they are known for by perception. It's price. So they still claim to be cheaper than the competition, but they still have a more expensive price than what T-Mobile used to cost. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you think that's what US Cellular is trying to do. They're trying to sell off the non-profitable markets. Let me know if you view T-Mobile as the bad guy in the industry now because they're trying to buy some players, some companies, some assets to be a better company overall. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Follow my social media outlets. This is Tyrone with Tech Live. See y'all in the next one. Peace.